Well, we're delighted to have with us today a very special guest, the co-author of a book that I think is receiving, well, it's been out for a while, but on the other hand, receiving a lot of attention now with the election of Pope Francis. And we have with us today Cris Putnam. He's the co-author of Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here. There's a picture of it there on the screen. You may want to check it out at Barnes & Noble or online at Amazon.com. And Cris, fascinating read to say the least. Nice to have you with us today. What is this, I guess, prophecy of the final pope? What is it?
Well, hi, Perry. It's great to be on the show with you.
Thank you.
So what we're dealing with here is an allegedly 900-year-old Catholic prophecy that was delivered by an Irish saint named Malachi Morgare. Now, the way the account goes of its origin is that Malachi was a bishop in Ireland, and he was trying to make some reforms in the church in his area. So he made a pilgrimage to Rome to see the Pope at that time. And outside the city of Rome, he had a vision. And this vision consisted of 112 popes into the future, basically up until what we would call the tribulation period that heralds the return of Christ. So Malachi wrote this vision down as a series of Latin phrases that seemed to describe some kind of visionary element of how this thing went. For each papacy, there was a little Latin phrase, and it seemed to describe something about the Pope or his coat of arms in many cases. Heraldry was really important in the medieval era. Something about events that might happen during his papacy. So it's a little imprecise in that I think a valid criticism of the way the prophecy works, that it doesn't always seem to be predicting the same sort of thing. So it's kind of open to interpretation in many cases. I think you can kind of go looking around for a way to make it seem fulfilled. And I think that that's a valid observation. But I mean, I tried to kind of debunk it myself. And, while I noticed that it's imprecise in that way, sometimes it's so uncannily precise that I really could not dismiss it. So, I think that, it's hard to say we're real hard and fast that this is definitely a true prophecy. I don't put it on the level of the biblical prophecies that I study, but I do think that it does show some remarkable track record of predicting the future, enough where I don't think we can dismiss it.
Fascinating. Has there been any kind of fulfillment of previous Catholic prophecies?
Well, I mean, I think it's a really broad category. I don't know how to answer that. I think that probably, yeah. I mean, okay, let's look at this Malachi prophecy, since that's the one we're talking about. So it's a string of Latin phrases, and a lot of them are about the coat of arms of popes. And they seem to describe something on his coat of arms. For instance, Paul VI, who was Pope in 1963. So we have this prophecy, hundreds of years before. We can establish without a doubt that it was printed and widely published in the 16th century. So when we see, matches in the 20th century, there's no way that you can argue it was after the fact or anything like that. So the motto for Paul VI was flower of flowers, flos florum in Latin. And but his coat of arms has 3 fleur-de-lis symbols on it, which is a symbol of the French monarchy. So it literally means in French, flower of the lily. So, the way I think, kind of skeptically, I'm thinking, well, maybe he knew about this prophecy and he picked his coat of arms and designed it so that he would be elected Pope. But it turns out they really have rules about how they do heraldry in Roman Catholicism. And by the time you're a bishop, you have to have a coat of arms. It's a requirement. Now, when you look at the careers of these guys, most of them are bishops 20, 30 years before they ever become Pope. So it would be really hard to anticipate when in the sequence you would fall and try to make your coat of arms match this prophecy. I mean, just to do that would be very tedious, and I don't think that's what's going on. But that's just to give you a sample of how a lot of them work. But the one that really captured my attention, I think the one that kind of makes you take notice, was the one for Benedict XV. So he was Pope in 1914 to 1922, and the Latin phrase for him was religio depopulata, which in English would mean religion depopulated. Now, this is an important one because it's kind of different than a lot of the other ones in this string of phrases, because it's making a pretty bold claim. It's saying religion depopulated. I mean, all things being equal, you would not expect that to occur. It's a falsifiable sort of claim that could have easily not happened. In fact, you wouldn't expect it to happen. But between 1914 and 1922, during his papacy, is the time of World War I, which was devastating to Europe and the Catholic Church. But really, I think more so than anything, it's the Bolshevik Revolution broke out in Russia. So we have the rise of militant atheism. They say 200 million people left the church due to the things that started right in this brief period. So that one alone really made me, have to reevaluate this prophecy and say, well, I can't be so skeptical that I just toss it out, because I can prove that it was printed in 1595. No one doubts that. So here we have in 1914, you follow the sequence in order, it lands right. Religion depopulated, and it's right when communism broke out.
Wow. Is there any characteristics about Pope Francis that is significant in kind of connecting the dots with this prophecy?
Well, I think it's a little too early to tell. But the thing that makes this prophecy so interesting and so sensational right now is that out of that list of 112 popes, he's the last one, and the final prophecy for his papacy, it goes like this. It says, "In the extreme persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will nourish the sheep in many tribulations. When they are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people." The end. That's the problem. It's not a short phrase for him. That's like a little paragraph. And of course, it sounds very apocalyptic.
Yeah. Krister, part of this, when this came out and now that Pope Francis is there, and there's been quite a few articles out there about him being the final pope, but it kind of connects back to some of the unrest within the Vatican City. Some of the inside problems that's going on with the Vatican would lead to some kind of turmoil more than perhaps a very ancient prophecy.
Well, I'll tell you, it's obviously there's been a lot of unprecedented events. I mean, in the last year, they've had this big scandal with the Butler leaking documents about some kind of shady dealings with the Vatican Bank and whatnot. And we haven't had a pope step down in 600 years. Pope Benedict's the first to do that, especially under these sort of circumstances. Perry, one of the things that's made our book kind of explode in interest since that announcement is that we actually wrote last April 2012 that Pope Benedict would step down. We predicted that a year ago, and then it happened. So that's really generated a lot of renewed interest in this book. And we did that really based on, one of the things I did when I went to investigate this prophecy is I read a lot of the books that have been written about it in the past. Now, a lot of these are foreign books. I read a book by a Jesuit priest named Father René Thibault, who was a Belgian university professor. He absolutely believed that this was a real prophecy. He did a lot of really fanciful kind of calculations and found anagrams and codes in the Latin text. Really fanciful kind of stuff. But what made it really sensational is that all these codes that he did, all these things that he did, landed in April of 2012, literally right when our book came out, as the time he thought that the papacy would change hands to the last pope. Now, we put all that in our book, and we were rushing to get this book out because we didn't think anybody would believe us unless we got it out ahead of time. Well, we got it out. He predicted that this last pope would arrive in April 2012. There was a lot of rumors that Benedict's health wasn't good. We put those in the book. We speculated that he would step down for health reasons. Of course, it didn't happen in April 2012. And we just assumed that René Thibault was wrong. Who would think that somebody writing in 1951, which is when his book was published, would be able to nail that? Well, in February 11th, when Benedict stepped down, I was reading the New York Times, and in fact, I have the quote right here. I'll just pull it up and just read this little snippet. It was in the February 11th New York Times. It says that the resignation was long in the planning was confirmed by the editor of the Vatican newspaper, who wrote Monday that the Pope's decision, quote, was taken many months ago after his trip to Mexico and Cuba in March of 2012 and kept with a reserve that no one could violate. end quote.
Whoa.
So Benedict actually decided to step down at the end of March and told only a few people in
Wow.
2012, right when this guy said he was going to do it.
Wow. Can I keep you through the break?
Sure.
Okay. Let me ask one question before we take a break. Is there any theological discord within the church that may be causing this ruckus?
Well, I think there certainly is. One of the sources that I quoted extensively in our book, Petrus Romanus, was a Jesuit priest named Father Malachi Martin. And he actually wrote a war between the papacy and the Jesuit order. Now, he wrote about this, in the late 80s and early 90s. He actually died in the year 2000, but he was definitely an insider. He was an advisor to two popes, and a high-level Jesuit who actually got released from his vows to write these books. So according to him, there was quite a skirmish going on. Now, the fact that Pope Francis is the first Jesuit pope tells me that it looks like they won the battle.
Wow. All right, let me take a break here. We'll be right back. Cris Putnam's with us today, and fascinating book. And this topic now has really kind of reached high proportions throughout the world. Petrus Romanus, there it is. You may want to take it, Romanus, you may want to take a look at that and check it out at Barnes & Noble and also at Amazon.com. He's also come out to a sequel with that. We'll talk to him about that when we get back from the break. Okay, we're back with Cris Putnam, and he has co-authored a fascinating book. It's been out for a while, Petrus Romanus, and it deals with the final pope is here, based upon a prophecy. And the sequel that you have out now, Cris, what is it?
It's called Exo Vaticana, and it's actually it's going into some fringy areas here. But the Vatican actually has their own observatory on top of Mount Graham in Arizona. Now there's a complex of telescopes up there that were built through a mirror lab at the University of Arizona. The Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope, a radio telescope called the submillimeter, and the Large Binocular Telescope, which is the most powerful telescope in the world, bar none. They actually get images better than the Hubble Space Telescope up there. Now, this begs a lot of questions, like why is the Vatican involved in high-level astronomy?
Yeah.
Why did the Vatican host an astrobiology conference in Rome in the year 2009? If you type the word extraterrestrial and baptize into a search engine, why do you get hundreds of articles by different Jesuit astronomers talking about baptizing ETs into the Catholic Church? Well, these are all the kinds of questions that we address in this new book, Exo Vaticana.
Whoa, that is fascinating material. All right, I want to come back to Pope Francis. I mean, he is Jesuit, so maybe that little scrimmage is at least set on the shelf for now. We've heard of controversy within the cardinals. There was a shift, or at least an attempt to shift it to more of a liberal position. Both Pope Benedict and John Paul tried to keep that more in the conservative ranks. Where do you think Pope Francis will go with the cardinals?
Well, these words like liberal and conservative, when you're talking about these kind of issues, and I think they're very vague. A lot of times what the media means, I mean, is he going to be conservative on things like abortion and contraception and those issues? Yes, he will. Yes. He'll hold the party line on all those issues. But, when you talk about being theologically conservative, I don't even think Benedict or John Paul II were. When I look at the sorts of views that they hold theologically. And that's where there's a lot of confusion. People get political conservatism confused with theological conservatism.
Right.
I mean, if you look at views they really have embraced higher criticism when it comes to the Bible. If you want to talk about the Genesis creation account and Pope Benedict's view, he views it as mythology. He's definitely embraced Darwinism and the whole naturalistic scientific paradigm when it comes to an issue like creation. So would we call that theologically conservative?
Wow.
Not in evangelical circles.
Right.
Certainly not.
Right. There's been talk about liberation theology from where the Pope come from. Will that surface, you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, from what I've seen, he has not taken any public stances in line with liberation theology. Now, a lot of times the way things appear aren't exactly the way they are, so it's hard to say. There's a big controversy right now on the internet that you'll see a lot of articles where there was a military kind of a junta, they call it, a junta or a junta, I think is how they pronounce it, in Argentina, a military coup that kind of took over the government and was really going after any people that were involved in liberation theology. So there's a controversy now where there's a couple Jesuits that seem to think that he turned them over to this military dictatorship, and they were tortured for 6 months and thrown out. Now, I don't know how culpable he is in that, but he's been accused. And there's quite a bit of documentation starting to show up that maybe he was sort of in bed with that military government. I don't know if that's true or not, so I can't really comment exactly if that's true, but I think there's plenty of articles that you might want to look into, and I think that's going to continue to be a controversy until it gets resolved.
All right, so back to the prophecy of potentially being the final pope. I mean, what would that mean to the Catholic Church if he is? I mean, what is it saying? Is it the church comes crumbling down? What's the deal?
Well, it seems to be forecasting the destruction of the city of Rome when it says the city of 7 hills will be destroyed. And that was really, the point of departure that really captured my interest, and my co-author Tom Horn, is that we studied the biblical prophecies. I am of the opinion that we're on the latter end of the time scale concerning Jesus' return. I see a lot of events around the nation of Israel, the Arab Spring,
Right.
Iran get nuclear weapons. I mean, there's just a lot of things that point to. Doesn't look like that this is going to go on much longer before Jesus returns. That is, if you take the Bible prophecies seriously. So in the book of Revelation, chapter 17, it talks about this great harlot religious system called Mystery Babylon. And it has a couple hints about how we might identify it. In the middle of the chapter, it talks about a 7-headed beast, and it says that the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. Now, when I look at the ending of this Malachi prophecy, it says the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, which I think is a fairly transparent reference to Rome. But really, to make that case, to me, just uncontroversial, is that at the end of Revelation 17, it says the woman that you saw is that great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. Now, in biblical hermeneutics, one of our rules is we try to always determine what was the original author's intention when he wrote this down. Mm-hmm. So John is composing the book of Revelation in the 1st century AD. It's at the peak of the Roman Empire. So when he writes something like that great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth, I don't see any good competition for Rome. So it seems to me John had Rome in mind. And, he's predicting that this city of Rome is going to be judged. Now, I see this Catholic prophecy saying the same thing. And to me, that kind of authenticates the Malachi prophecy in a way maybe a lot of people haven't considered, is that something called the principle of embarrassment. For instance, when I argue with a skeptic about the authenticity of the Gospels, I'll often bring up, it says that they put details like the apostles ran when Jesus was arrested, or that Peter denied the Lord 3 times. And usually people don't make up testimony that doesn't make them look good. So when I have a Catholic prophecy that says the city of 7 hills will be destroyed and the dreadful judge will judge the people, that kind of rings true to me in a way, because it's not the sort of thing you would expect a Catholic to make up.
No, not at all. Do you think that the Pope has that much religious influence outside of the Catholic Church? In other words, who else could he possibly rally or be around him, other religions, or could he?
Well, I think that the world does look to the Pope as some sort of leader. How much influence does he have? I don't know. The Vatican has a lot of political influence that a lot of people aren't aware of. If you think about it, here's an institution. It's probably the longest running institution that we know of, really continuously. So they have all sorts of records, but they also have people in high levels in the governments of almost every nation. For data collection. I mean, I don't know what sort of activities they're involved in, but some of the things that Malachi Martin wrote, it seems to be that even the CIA turns to the Vatican for intelligence. So, I suspect that they have a lot more influence than we're aware of. But one of the things that interests me, looking at biblical prophecy, is the ecumenical movement that they've been involved in over the last few years, since Vatican II in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
There was a day of prayer that Pope John Paul II had, and he invited people from all religions. So he had literally voodoo priests and African witch doctors, and Hindu gurus, and the people of all these really disparate religions that don't necessarily cohere at all there at the Vatican praying together. Now, it's okay to me to want to coexist with people, but these religions contradict each other in fundamental ways. I mean, there's a picture of him on the internet from that day where he picked up the Quran and kissed it. Now, as a Christian, I just have a problem with that, because that book, it says that God has no son, and it says that Jesus is not God. And I don't see how I can embrace that in a spirit of ecumenical faith. But, when you look at biblical prophecy and it's talking about this great harlot religious system, that seems to be what it's saying, that this idea of pluralism, this idea that all religions are equal paths to God, is going to become the popular thing. And I think that I see that trend in the culture. Now, the sort of theology that Vatican II embraced seems to be paving the way for that system.
Pluralism being what it is, but what's so interesting, I find that somewhat staggering that the Pope would be involved in it at that level, because, and I'm saying he didn't do it, what I'm saying is I'm just kind of shocked that he did do it, and what signal that sends when they seem to radiate a very strong foothold in what they do believe. They draw a line in it. They said, this is who we are. We don't budge from it. And they put money to it. So I just don't understand what the motive would be to have this pluralistic mindset at that ranks of the Vatican.
Well, I mean, you have to look at the theology that came out of Vatican II. I mean, it's there. They even have a construct that Karl Rahner, one of their famous theologians, came up with called the anonymous Christian, literally meaning that someone can be a Christian without knowing it. Okay, if you're a good Muslim and you do the best you can with what you have to work with, you could be an anonymous Christian. So this is literally in the sort of language that is written into their own theological documents. It does seem contradictory. I mean, it's contradictory with the sorts of things they've said historically. So, I can't really make sense of it as far as all that goes, but I know that it has been written and it's done. And the thing that, we found even weirder is that these statements by these Jesuit astronomers talking about they would be willing to baptize extraterrestrials. Now, you talk about pluralism.
Yeah. So Pope Francis, I mean, all right, he's new on the job now, and he's got some settling down to do. It's possible he's going to pick a scab that's going to erupt, you think?
It's hard to say at this point, but I think he's going to try to smooth everything over. I mean, I think that's probably why they elected someone outside of Rome, someone from South America, because they have so much political infighting and controversy, and I think a lot of it has to do with finances. It does seem that there's been some revelations where there's been some pretty nefarious financial practices at the Vatican Bank. So I think they wanted someone who was a political outsider. So maybe, hopefully, he can clean house on some of the corruption that they're having there.
Well, Cris, this is fascinating. Let me encourage our listeners and viewers, if you want to pick up a copy of the book, there's a picture of it there on the screen, Petrus Romanus, and it's put out, you can get it at Barnes & Noble or online at Amazon.com. And the new one, again, the new title of your follow-up book that's going to be released this week?
Vaticana, and you can go to RaidersNewsUpdate.com to find out information about that, and also you can order Petrus Romanus from them as well. That's my publisher's site, Raiders News Update.
All right, and when the new one gets out and I get a copy of it, I'll take a look at it and we'll get you back, okay?
Okay, certainly. That'll be my pleasure. It's great to talk to you, Barry.
Yeah, you're fascinating. Thanks, Cris.
Thank you.